Okay, let's unpack this. You sent me all this fascinating stuff about uh, ancient Indian art and architecture, right?
Right.
But then suddenly, bam, we have the Kama Sutra.
Yeah, it is kind of intriguing, isn't it? I think a lot of times we tend to think of art and sensuality as these like totally separate things,
Yeah,
but these sources are saying, that's so much, especially back then in ancient India.
total. And that's like what makes this whole deep dive so cool. We're not just looking at pretty sculptures.
Right.
We're not just like reading this old text.
Exactly.
We're trying to figure out how all these seemingly random pieces fit together.
Yeah.
So like how were art and architecture and the Kama Sutra all connected back then?
It's a good question.
Right. It's almost like we're putting together a puzzle
Yeah.
where like all the pieces came from different boxes, but they somehow still make a picture, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
I love that. So let's start with a big piece of this puzzle, the Temple of Surya at Konark. It's like considered this masterpiece of Indian architecture, blending Buddhist, Brahmanical, and Jain influences.
And what makes this temple even more fascinating is it's covered with all these life-size sculptures.
Right.
A lot of them are, how should I put this? Let's just say they're pretty intimate.
Yeah, and the text straight up says, the Hindu mind openly faced the sexual function as the reality it is, one of the expressions of a divine mind.
Wow.
Yeah, it kind of makes you think, especially if you grew up in a culture where sexuality and spirituality are seen as totally separate things.
Absolutely. Yeah.
What do you think, listener? Does the idea of embracing sexuality as like part of the divine, does that resonate with you at all?
Yeah, it really makes you question everything.
Yeah,
Like the Temple of Surya seems to be straight up celebrating the erotic as something sacred.
right.
Like it's a part of this divine energy that flows through everything.
Like the spiritual and the physical, they're not against each other, right? They're just
Mhm.
like two sides of the same coin.
Exactly. And that theme of interconnectedness comes up again and again when we look at these sculptures of apsaras.
Okay,
These like beautiful semi-divine nymphs.
right.
And a lot of times they're shown interacting with ascetics.
Hmm.
Those people who've renounced worldly pleasures to like pursue spiritual enlightenment.
Right. And sometimes it's not a super peaceful interaction, right?
No, not all.
Like sometimes these apsaras are shown like humbling or even tempting these super pious ascetics.
That's right. And that's where things get interesting.
Right.
These sculptures seem to suggest that being too pious, like denying the physical world completely, was seen as a bad thing.
Really?
Yeah, like a challenge to the cosmic order.
So it's not just about asceticism versus pleasure,
No,
but about finding a balance between the two.
exactly.
Right.
The apsaras are almost like divine intervention,
Okay.
reminding those ascetics about the importance of harmony between the spiritual and the earthly realms.
Like a cosmic reminder that we're both body and soul, right?
Right.
And neglecting either side can throw things off balance.
And that interplay between seemingly opposite forces is something we see again and again, wouldn't you say?
I would, yeah.
Like, the text even mentions the Satas,
Okay.
a sect that worshipped the feminine, and they totally embraced the sexual element as part of their spiritual practice.
Wow. So they're basically saying that you can't really understand the sacred without acknowledging like the power and beauty of the sensual.
Exactly.
That's pretty cool.
And what's really remarkable is that this blending of traditions wasn't seen as unusual.
Really?
Yeah, the text suggests that the Temple of Surya itself might be fusing elements of Surya worship
Okay.
with Naga or serpent worship and Sata beliefs.
So it wasn't about strict boundaries between different groups.
Right.
It was more about a fluid, inclusive approach to spirituality.
Yeah, and that fluidity is like super characteristic of ancient Indian religious thought. It allowed for blending and evolution of spiritual understanding over time.
This is also fascinating. Okay, now I really want to get into the Kama Sutra itself. From the excerpts you sent, it seems like it's way more than just like an erotic manual.
Oh, yeah.
It's like this whole guide to love, sex, and relationship.
Exactly. It's about approaching pleasure with intention and skill,
Okay.
understanding the nuances of touch, and cultivating a deeper connection with your partner.
And it's not just about the physical act, right?
Right.
Like the Kama Sutra also emphasizes the importance of understanding the emotional and psychological aspects of love and desire.
Absolutely.
Wow.
There's even one part that defines kama as the enjoyment of appropriate objects by the five senses, assisted by the mind together with the soul.
So it's not just physical, it's like a whole being experience.
Exactly.
This makes me wonder, listener, how does this ancient Indian view of sensual pleasure compare to like modern perspectives? Have we lost something with how we often separate sexuality from everything else, or have we evolved beyond needing those kinds of frameworks?
It's definitely something to think about, isn't it?
Totally.
Maybe there's something we can learn from that holistic approach.
Right.
From understanding that pleasure, when it's pursued with awareness and respect, can be a path to deeper connection.
Yeah.
Not just with our partners, but with ourselves and the world around us.
Okay, so we've established that the Kama Sutra is about way more than just the act of sex, right?
Right.
But it also places sensual pleasure within like a broader framework of a fulfilling life, doesn't it?
It does.
Like the text emphasizes the importance of dharma, artha, and kama as the three worldly attainments.
Yes, with dharma representing virtue and righteous conduct,
Okay.
artha being wealth and material prosperity,
Right.
and then, of course, kama being pleasure and enjoyment.
Gotcha. And the text isn't saying to deny any of these, right?
No, not at all.
It's about understanding their importance and how they work together to create a balanced and meaningful life.
Exactly. The text acknowledges the importance of all three.
Yeah.
But it does emphasize that dharma should take precedence over artha,
Okay.
and artha over kama.
So it's not about like denying pleasure, but about making sure that it aligns with our values.
Yeah.
And it doesn't overshadow other parts of our lives.
It's about finding that balance where all three elements work together.
Right.
Each one supporting and enriching the others.
And this brings us to a really interesting detail, the 64 arts. Like the Kama Sutra mentions that a well-rounded education includes all kinds of skills.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, from singing and dancing to cosmetics, cooking, and even training animals.
Wow.
It's like they believed in cultivating the whole person,
Right.
nurturing both their practical and artistic abilities.
You could think of it as like the ancient Indian equivalent of a Renaissance person.
Yeah, totally.
They really valued mastery in a variety of disciplines.
Mm.
They thought it led to a richer and more fulfilling life.
This is really making me rethink my own definition of like well-roundedness. It's not just about, degrees and jobs.
Mm-hmm.
It's about developing a diverse set of skills and experiences that make our lives better on like all levels.
Absolutely.
So we're back and diving deeper into ancient Indian art and the Kama Sutra. And, something we've been seeing is this idea that the Kama Sutra isn't just about the physical stuff,
Right.
It also digs into those social and emotional twists and turns of relationships.
Absolutely. And one place where this really comes out is in the Kama Sutra's discussion of marriage. Like, the text really emphasizes that a marriage done according to religious principles, can lead to a whole bunch of good things.
Okay, like what?
Well, dharma, artha, children, strong family ties, and of course, lasting love.
Sounds like they were pretty serious about the whole marriage thing, huh?
Oh yeah, they definitely didn't mess around. But they didn't just stop there.
What do you mean?
The Kama Sutra actually goes into a lot of detail about like what to look for in a partner and how to build a successful marriage.
Really? So, like, what did they think made a good wife back then?
Well, the text describes the ideal wife as someone who comes from a good family, younger than her husband, and has certain physical attributes.
Like what?
Like beautiful hair, healthy physique, and obviously a good personality.
Interesting. They really spelled it out, huh? Gives you a peek into what was important back then, I guess.
Yeah, totally. But it wasn't all about looks, though.
Oh, okay. What else did they talk about?
Well, the text emphasizes a wife's devotion to her husband, her skills in managing the household, and how she behaves when he's not around.
So basically, a woman who's both capable and devoted to her family.
Exactly. A true partner.
Yeah, they each have their role but work together, right?
Right, to create a happy, prosperous home.
And the text doesn't shy away from the day-to-day stuff either, does it?
No, not at all. It even gives advice on, like, stocking up on supplies, things like firewood and iron pots when they're cheap.
Wow, it's like part marriage manual, part home economics class. Makes you realize that people have always struggled with the same stuff, right?
Totally. And you know what's really interesting to me?
What?
The text mentions that a virtuous woman should be knowledgeable about, like, fragrant substances, medicines, and seeds.
Huh. So they were expected to know about herbal remedies and, like, preserving food.
Yeah, basically, it really shows how important they were to the health and well-being of their families.
They were like the original DIY queens.
Right. It challenges that whole idea that women back then were just stuck at home.
Yeah, it sounds like they had a huge impact on their families and communities.
Absolutely. And the text goes even further.
Oh.
Yeah, it lays out how a virtuous woman should treat her servants, friends, and relatives.
Interesting. What does it say?
Well, it emphasizes kindness, respect, and a strong sense of duty to your social circle.
So it's really about that interconnectedness, right? Like,
Mhm.
it wasn't just about individual relationships, but about keeping things harmonious in the whole community.
Exactly. And this brings up a question that I'm sure some listeners might be thinking.
Okay, what's that?
What about when a marriage isn't perfect, you know?
Right.
What about those situations where, like, a woman is disliked by her husband or has to deal with multiple wives?
Yeah, life isn't always a fairy tale, even in ancient texts, I bet. So how does the Kama Sutra handle those less than ideal situations?
Well, the cool thing is it doesn't ignore them. The text actually gives advice on how a woman can win back her husband's love, how to manage rivalries between wives, and even how to navigate remarriage.
Wow, it's like a guide to surviving and thriving in the ancient Indian marriage game. It shows that women back then, despite their roles, had to be pretty smart and strong to deal with all that.
It really does, and it shows that even in a society where arranged marriages were the norm, they still knew you had to put in effort to make it work.
Okay, so we talked about marriage from the woman's side. What about the men? Did the Kama Sutra have anything to say about being a good husband?
Oh, absolutely. They didn't let the guys off easy. The text describes what makes a good husband. Well-educated, skilled in various arts, generous, attentive to his wife's needs. Oh, and it even mentions personal hygiene.
So it was a two-way street, right? Both partners had things they were supposed to do.
Exactly. The text really emphasizes mutual respect, understanding, and building a happy, fulfilling relationship.
But let's be real, the Kama Sutra isn't just about, like, perfect wives and husbands. It acknowledges that desire and pleasure can happen outside of marriage, too.
It does.
And that's where we get into this whole other world, the world of courtesans.
Right. It's a fascinating part of ancient Indian society.
It really is. Tell me more about these courtesans. Like, what was their role?
Well, the Kama Sutra actually spends a lot of time discussing courtesans, their strategies for attracting and keeping lovers, even their finances. It shows they weren't just like objects of pleasure. They were smart businesswomen with social standing and influence.
Wow, that's amazing. The text actually celebrates this aspect of ancient Indian life.
It does. It's a reminder that desire and sexuality can take many forms and that even those who didn't follow the typical rules could be successful and independent. And the text really digs into the nuances of this world.
Okay,
Like, it describes different types of men and women based on their sexual appetites and preferences.
interesting.
It even uses, like, animal comparisons,
Like what?
like merewoman or hareman, to categorize people by their physical traits and sexual skills.
It's like they were trying to understand all the different ways people experience desire. Pretty cool that they were thinking about that so long ago.
It is, and it doesn't stop there.
What else?
The text also gives advice on the art of seduction, how to read a woman's signals and win her over.
It's like a combination of a psychology book and an ancient dating guide.
Exactly.
What kind of advice did they give?
Well, it's a mix of practical tips, insights into psychology, and even like magic formulas.
Magic formulas, come on.
I know, right? The text describes how to use perfumes, flowers, even certain words and gestures to create like a romantic mood and spark desire.
They even talk about using a female messenger to, like, help set things up.
Right, a go-between. That was pretty common back then. And sometimes the text says a woman might even be her own go-between, using hints and suggestive language to show her interest.
Wow, so many different ways to play the game.
Right. It's fascinating how the Kama Sutra explores all these dynamics of attraction and courtship, both inside and outside marriage.
It paints a picture of a society where love and desire were like this complicated dance, right? Shaped by social rules, individual preferences, and a good dose of strategy.
Exactly. And we have to remember that this was a society with very clear social hierarchies.
Right.
So the text naturally talks about how people in power, like kings and ministers, navigated this world of love and desire.
Because they couldn't just, like, openly pursue anyone they wanted, right?
Right. It wouldn't have been proper.
So how did they manage those urges while staying within the rules?
Well, the text describes how kings, using, discreet go-betweens and carefully planned encounters, could enjoy themselves without, like, causing a scandal.
So even in matters of the heart, power dynamics, and social rules were super important.
Oh, absolutely. It's a good reminder that the Kama Sutra isn't just some theoretical book about love.
Right.
It reflects the real lives of people in ancient India with all their complications and contradictions.
This has been such an eye-opening journey. We've seen this world where spirituality and sensuality are all mixed up. Marriage is both a duty and a game. And the pursuit of pleasure, whether you're married or not, was treated with, like, this blend of practicality, artistry, and deep understanding of human nature.
It really has been, and we're not done yet. In the last part of our deep dive, we're going to get into some of the more interesting parts of the Kama Sutra.
Okay? Like what?
We'll talk about everything from magical formulas and aphrodisiacs to the text's very detailed descriptions of, well, techniques for enhancing pleasure.
Sounds like we saved the best for last. Don't miss it, listener, as we wrap up our exploration of the Kama Sutra and its insights into the world of love and desire in ancient India. Okay, so here we are, the final part of our deep dive into the Kama Sutra.
It is, yeah.
You know, we've talked about temples, we've talked about marriage and all those social dynamics.
Right.
But let's be honest, we've kind of saved the juiciest stuff for last, right?
I think it's safe to say that.
You know, the excerpts you sent get pretty detailed, talking about different kinds of embraces, kisses, even biting.
It's true.
It's like they had a whole language for lovemaking back then.
Yeah, and it's that attention to detail that's so fascinating.
Right.
The Kama Sutra isn't just about the act itself. It's about the nuances, you know?
Yep.
The way touch feels, the way the senses work together, and how pleasure builds gradually.
Like they even talk about the touching embrace, right?
Uh-huh.
Where you just kind of brush against someone while walking by.
Right, very subtle.
Or how about the piercing embrace? The text says, a woman in a lonely place bends down as if to pick up something and pierces, as it were, a man sitting or standing with her breasts.
It's quite a visual, isn't it?
It's like something out of a movie. And remember, this was a society where sensuality was everywhere, right?
Absolutely.
Not just in private, but in their art, music, dance, even how they interacted with each other every day.
It was part of the culture.
Then there's this whole section on nail marks and biting. Love bites were a thing back then too, apparently. And they even, like, categorized different types of marks.
They did.
Lines of points, broken clouds. It's like they had a secret language of love written on the body.
And it's interesting because the text actually says that not everyone was into this stuff.
Really?
Yeah, some women from certain parts of India, they thought it was too rough.
Huh.
But in other areas, it was seen as super passionate.
It just goes to show that even within one culture, you can have a ton of different preferences, right?
Absolutely. Human sexuality is a spectrum, and the Kama Sutra, even though it's so old, it reflects that.
Totally. Okay, now things get even more interesting when we get to the part about different types of sexual unions.
Right.
They use terms like high Congress, low Congress, even Congress of a Crow. Some of these names, I got to be honest, I have no idea what they mean.
Yeah, some of the terminology is definitely a bit obscure.
A bit. But it seems like high Congress and low Congress refer to how the partners are positioned.
That's my guess, too.
And Congress of a Crow, well, let's just say you'd need to be pretty flexible for that one. But beyond the weird names, what's important is that the Kama Sutra recognizes that there are lots of different positions and practices.
Exactly. It's like they're saying, hey, there's no right or wrong way to do this.
Right.
Find what works for you.
Explore and experiment. And that open-mindedness extends to things that might have been taboo, even back then, like there's a whole chapter on mouth Congress.
I think we can all guess what that's about.
Yeah, not exactly dinner table conversation, but the fact that it's in there, you know, it says a lot about how the Kama Sutra wanted to be this complete guide to human sexual behavior.
It does. And even though it mentions that some people thought this practice was the work of a dog,
Wow.
it's still included, which suggests that it was happening.
It just shows that what's acceptable changes over time, right? And the Kama Sutra, instead of judging, just wants to understand human experience.
Totally. Okay, now we have to talk about the miscellaneous experiments and recipes section.
Okay, hit me with it.
This is where things get really wild, magical formulas, aphrodisiacs, even stuff for invisibility. It's like ancient Indian magic.
No way, really?
It's amazing. These recipes show this fascinating blend of folklore, traditional medicine, and that human desire to control and enhance our experiences, especially with love and attraction.
So, like, what kind of stuff are we talking about?
Well, there's one recipe for a mixture that supposedly makes you invisible. It involves burning the heart of an Ichneumon, the eyes of a serpent, and some kind of gourd fruit.
I think I'll pass on that one.
Probably a good idea, but it's just fascinating to see how these beliefs were connected to love and attraction.
Right. What about those aphrodisiacs?
Oh, yeah, those two. Potions and concoctions to increase desire and, enhance performance. Some of the ingredients actually sound pretty good. Honey, ghee, licorice, different herbs.
Maybe not so bad.
Well, whether they worked or not, who knows? But they showed this timeless human fascination with boosting pleasure and dealing with anxieties about sex.
So it seems like the Kama Sutra was trying to be this all-inclusive guide to love, desire, and relationships. It covered everything from marriage and running a household to seduction and the art of making love.
And it all speaks to the complexity of human nature, how social norms, individual desires, and those powerful forces of love and pleasure all mix together.
Right. And even though some of it might seem a bit shocking or funny to us now, it gives us this incredible look into a culture that was way more open about sensuality than we are today.
And maybe we can still learn something from that.
Definitely. So, listener, what do you think? What surprised you about this deep dive into the Kama Sutra? Did it challenge your ideas about love and relationships? Did any of it resonate with you personally? We'd love to hear your thoughts. This has been an amazing exploration, and we hope you've learned something not just about the Kama Sutra, but about how love and relationships have played out across different cultures and throughout history. Thanks for listening.